Now, one thing I want to make clear right at the start of this video is that these are predictions as to how Episode 9 will more or less play out and how the Star Wars saga will be brought to an end. It's not, however, how I necessarily want it to be brought to an end. It's just how I see the story we've gotten so far concluding. And I bring this up because about a year before The Last Jedi came out, I made a video predicting Rey would essentially be nobody, and her parents were maybe even going to be deadbeats who sold her. And a great many people got angry at me and called me an idiot and questioned as to why I wanted the story to go that way when I didn't. It was just how I saw the story progressing after seeing The Force Awakens. And though at the time I didn't hate the idea of Rey being essentially nobody, assuming it was handled well, there were many other ideas for Rey that I would have preferred. Anyway, with that little disclaimer out of the way, and giving my credentials if you will, I do want to start by making a few relatively safe assumptions about Episode 9. First, that it will take place at least a few years after the end of Episode 8, thus allowing time for several important things to happen, like the new rebellion to grow and become a legitimate threat to now Kylo Ren's First Order. It will also allow Rey to, in some capacity, learn and train either to become a Jedi, or to find yourself on the verge of becoming a full-fledged Jedi. It will also give a chance for all our other characters to grow and change in some respect, not to mention find themselves in totally new and different scenarios. Next, I think it's a safe bet that Episode 9 will likely bring an end to the entire Star Wars saga, yet do it in a way that leaves some small opening for Episode 10 someday, and another whole trilogy of course. And I think that because, well, when you consider the amount of money Disney and Lucasfilm could potentially make, perhaps 15 years or so from now, by bringing back the Skywalker saga, there's just no way they'll be able to resist doing it, especially if whatever new material they come up with in the meantime isn't resonating with fans or the general audience. Lastly, I think J.J. Abrams will, in a sense, resurrect some of the ideas he initially had for this trilogy that may have been derailed a bit by what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. And I'm not saying he's going to retcon aspects of The Last Jedi, or make it where Snoke is still alive, or have Rey's parents actually not be deadbeats, but some of the ideas he had presented in The Force Awakens may see light again. We even recently learned that Abrams had written story treatments for episodes 8 and 9 after doing The Force Awakens. That got completely abandoned by Johnson. So I think it's a safe bet some of his original ideas for episode 9 may be incorporated into his vision of episode 9 now. Okay, now with those assumptions out of the way, let me now address something I hear a lot of people say after The Last Jedi. That being that episode 9 feels so open-ended, or like there's so many different directions the story could go in. And sure, there's a lot of different paths the story could go down, but really, there's only a few final destinations that would make any kind of sense for what's now been set up in these first two movies of the trilogy, and what will make for a truly fitting end to the 9-part Star Wars saga. Because when you think about it, we're left with only two important questions right now for the overall plot of this trilogy and the saga as a whole. And those are, will the First Order be stopped? And how does the final confrontation between Rey and Kylo Ren play out and end? Or more simply, what happens to Kylo Ren, the last of the Skywalkers, not of course counting Leia? Will he be victorious, defeated, or redeemed? That's essentially it. The questions that this last movie has to answer in order to complete the story. And sure, we will also learn the final fates of other characters such as Finn, Poe, and again probably Leia, and I'm not saying they won't be important factors in answering one of those two big questions, or that the final part of their story won't be exciting or even monumental in some way, shape, or form. But more or less, these characters will be used just to serve the greater story and answer one of those previous questions. Okay, so let's really start to look at those questions then, starting with the first one. Will the First Order be stopped? Yes, of course they will. There's almost no chance this trilogy ends with them being victorious because, honestly, that's just not a good way to end the Star Wars saga. I mean, think about it. Star Wars is a story that has been told now over the span of 40 plus years. It's one of the greatest, most beloved stories of our time, and has become more than just a collection of movies for a lot of people. So why would you end this multi-generational story, where one of the main messages has always been about hope, where the hero's journey has always been at the core, with the First Order being victorious and ruling the galaxy with an iron fist? Especially when you consider they've been shown to be mostly incompetent, and I dare say most people really aren't all that vested or even interested in them. Certainly not to the point where them being victorious would be a satisfying end. And I know some of you might counter by saying, well, episode 3 or the prequel trilogy ended with the bad guys winning, so why can't this one end the same way? Well, here's the thing. Episode 3 had to end that way. We knew how the next part of the story was going to start and eventually play out, so it wouldn't have made sense to give us a truly happy ending at the end of 3, and then episode 4 starts and everything has gone to hell somehow in the meantime. The point of the prequel trilogy was to set up the conflict in the original trilogy. The point of the sequel trilogy, though the original had already done this, is to give us a satisfying end to the whole story. Okay, so keeping that in mind, that we're almost certainly going to get an overall happy ending where, to oversimplify it, the good guys win, though that doesn't mean there won't be loss or sacrifice on their side. What does that mean for the character of Kylo Ren? Well, if the First Order is destined to lose, that almost certainly means we'll find them on the verge of defeat or destruction at the start of this movie, and they're likely going to be down to one last desperate attempt to save themselves somehow, which kind of flips the script from previous Star Wars movies where it's always been the good guys who were down to one last chance. It also means the plot of this movie will be the New Rebellion having to stop this last-ditch effort of theirs to essentially win the war and bring peace back to the galaxy. What this will also do is put Kylo Ren on the side that is losing at the start, which will right away make him more sympathetic, since I think his main story in this movie is that he simply will not give up despite almost certain defeat, which also makes him even more sympathetic. I think with J.J. Abrams being back at the helm for this movie, Vader's helmet will come back into play, and what he wants to finish is simply ruling the galaxy, something Vader never did but strived to do. And he's so desperate to do this that it's led him and the First Order down a path of ruin, and to the point where they're going to, again, do some crazy last resort plan that likely will have dire consequences for the galaxy if they succeed. And yes, I know, The Last Jedi seemed to establish that he was done being a Vader wannabe, that he spoke of killing the past, and so this might feel like a regression for his character. But this is one of those lost ideas that I really think J.J. Abrams will bring back and will also make sense to the story. I think a failing, near-defeated Kylo Ren is going to cling to the idea that, as a Skywalker, he is meant to rule the galaxy, that their purpose is not only to balance the Force, but to ensure order. I could also see, though this may be a bit of a want, the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker showing up and trying to talk some sense into him, and telling him the story of Vader and the true purpose of the Skywalkers, but even that won't save Kylo. Sadly though, as fitting as it would be for a story where the first 6 parts were about the rise, fall, and then redemption of Anakin Skywalker, I don't think we'll be seeing him come back as a Force ghost. Instead, I think Luke will no doubt come to Rey at some point, likely midway through the movie, which will be the turning point for Rey, because I honestly think when Episode 9 starts, it will quickly be established that Rey is struggling to become not only a Jedi, but with what everyone now thinks she should be in the absence of the great Luke Skywalker. And, love Rey or hate her, I think it makes for a far more interesting story if this one scavenger from Jakku, after her whirlwind 4-day adventure that was The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, where the Force awakened in her and spurred her to victory, will now get hit by the reality that people want her to lead them, and be a beacon of hope and inspiration, and that she does not know how to do that, and she shies away from it. I mean, her entire life had been spent living alone and relying entirely on herself without having to worry about the well-being of anyone but herself. Now the spotlight is on her and people want her to be a hero who leads them to victory, and I think it would be great and make sense if she just can't cope with this, and at the start of the movie, doesn't know what to do, and we find that she just wants to get away from all this, and eventually does even leave at some point. This is of course when Luke comes to her and convinces her to keep walking the path of the Jedi, likely telling her about his own struggles, thus further redeeming himself and allowing him to have a moment where he truly teaches Rey something positive about the Jedi, instead of reasons why they need to end. In The Last Jedi, Rey's character was driven forward in spite of Luke. I think this time it'll be reversed, and he will be what inspires and motivates her. This might even be a chance for Luke to explain to Rey and us some secret about the Skywalker family and what they were originally meant to do, and that what Kylo Ren is doing now is very much against that original intent and is dangerous to the entire galaxy. This could also be where we learn that the bond between Rey and Kylo Ren is still very much in place, and she tells Luke of the horrible things she has seen in his mind that will come to pass if he's not stopped and succeeds with this crazy plan. This not only helps give even more context to Luke's rash decision to almost kill his nephew in The Last Jedi, but gives Rey a reason to get invested because she knows what she is ignoring by leaving, and what she and she alone can stop. Rey will also insist, despite all of this, that there is still light in him, that what he has become is all a result of Snoke's manipulation. Luke will agree and tell Rey that one way or the other, he must be stopped, and she is the only one who can do it. And right now you might be thinking, this sounds a lot like Return of the Jedi. But here's the thing, there's almost no way for this not to be like Return of the Jedi in terms of how the story plays out. There pretty much has to be one last battle between the Rebellion and the First Order. People would no doubt be disappointed if we didn't get a big battle at some point in this movie after all. And in that battle, the First Order will be defeated, much like the Empire was. And there's no way for the story for Kylo Ren and Rey to end but for them to simply confront each other again, because, well, the two big outside wildcards, Snoke and Luke, were removed from the story. And honestly, their deaths are what I found so odd about The Last Jedi, because it now puts the story squarely on the shoulders of Rey and Kylo Ren, which you could certainly argue is how it should be. But that is a heavy burden for these two characters to bear, because what Snoke and Luke did was give outside factors to Rey and Kylo's story, which really could have thrown a curveball into this last part. I mean, imagine if Luke didn't die in Episode 8, yet Snoke still had. We'd all be wondering right now how this is going to play out. How can Kylo Ren stand a chance against Rey and Luke? For better or worse, theories would again be running rampant on the internet right now about such possibilities as Rey falling to the dark side and joining Kylo Ren against Luke for Episode 9. Instead, not many people are talking about their excitement for this next episode or speculating about what will happen. And I'm certainly not saying that nobody is excited for Episode 9 or that nobody likes the setup and possibilities for this last movie in the trilogy and saga. But compare the excitement and speculation The Force Awakens left us with that The Last Jedi left us with. You might hate the mystery box approach that was J.J. Abrams' Episode 7, but wow, did it keep the buzz around Star Wars going for 2 years until The Last Jedi came out. And mostly in a positive way. People genuinely were excited to know what happened next and kept talking about it. And then Rian Johnson subverted all those expectations and was praised by some for it and hated by others, and left the fan base in a state of full-scale war where some ruthlessly attacked The Last Jedi while others staunchly defended. Yes, The Force Awakens had its detractors as well, but it still left most people intrigued and wanting to see more. It left them speculating about what was to come. On the flip side, The Last Jedi has left us fans stuck in a rut about whether it was the best Star Wars movie ever or the worst, instead of looking forward and asking, what's next? And the reason I bring this all up is because this last encounter that will take place just between Rey and Kylo Ren has all the pressure in the galaxy upon it and must be utterly monumental. Not just because it will mainly determine whether or not Episode 9 is a good movie or not just because it has to keep the fans who are loving this trilogy thus far happy, well, maybe, just maybe, luring those who haven't liked it back into the fold. Not just because it will be compared to Luke vs. Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi, and even to Obi-Wan vs. Anakin at the end of Revenge of the Sith, but because this final encounter between Rey and Kylo Ren, which will again have no outside factors such as Luke or Snoke, will now be what concludes the Star Wars saga. What happens between these two characters will henceforth be the end of Star Wars. So how do you do this? How do you end Star Wars in a satisfying way with just these two characters to work with? Well, as I've been saying, you start by making both of them as sympathetic and relatable as possible, so when they do meet, you don't want to see either one of them lose or die. Rey doubting herself and her ability to lead and become some iconic Jedi, and Kylo refusing to give up because he feels it's his legacy as a Skywalker to save the galaxy by, of course, ruling over it, would be the easiest, most logical paths to that in my opinion, though the movie itself may opt to do it in a different way, but I'd be stunned if it doesn't try very hard to set up a duel where we want to see both sides survive. You then have to mix in some kind of outside factor to help add to the tension of this last encounter. Again, with Luke and Snoke gone, something else will have to be manufactured within this last movie to do this. Likely, and this may be more of a hope than anything, it will have something to do with the legacy of the Skywalker family and bringing balance to the Force. Tying in, of course, with this assumption Kylo Ren is under that he must finish what Vader started and balance the Force and save the galaxy. And it will also likely loosely or directly tie in to whatever this last-ditch effort the First Order is doing that the Rebellion is trying to stop. Rey will then be forced to confront Kylo because she will know the true outcome of what he is trying to do, likely told to her by Luke. And obviously, it won't be good. Kylo will of course refuse to believe her, and they will fight, and there's then only two conceivable ways I could see such a fight ending. First, despite numerous pleas and trying to explain to him the disastrous consequences of what he's doing, Rey will be forced to destroy Kylo Ren in order to stop what he's trying to accomplish. He simply will not give up on this idea that he is destined to rule, or in his eyes save, the galaxy, and the tragic part of this is, Rey, who will be shown to still very much care about Kylo and his fate, thanks in large part to the bond that still exists between them, and coming to an understanding that he has lived a very tortured life, thanks in large part to Snoke, she will have to kill him in order to stop him. She will simply be given no other choice, and it'll tear her apart to do it. This then ends the story of the Skywalkers, but also allows Rey to maybe proclaim somehow that she will take up their name, maybe making such a promise to the dying Kylo Ren, who feels like he has failed his family, thus leaving the door open for episode 10 someday. And honestly, this is how I think it will go, because it accomplishes everything they'd want by making Rey the hero, giving her a happy ending-ish, and allowing her to come back someday and continue the story of the Skywalkers, but at the same time breaking it away from Luke, Vader, and so on, and allowing it to become something different. It also puts the Force in balance in a way more in line with how George Lucas has described it in the past, with there being no Sith. And though Kylo and Snoke were not Sith, they were the next best or worst thing. The other way I could see this ending is Rey coming to the realization that, since she exists as a counterbalance to Kylo Ren, she too needs to die in order to prevent the darkness rising again to now match her because of how powerful she is. This could be done by having Rey sacrifice herself to destroy Kylo Ren and stop whatever he's doing that will have the dire repercussions for the galaxy. Or after somehow coming to the realization, and this would likely happen slowly throughout the course of the movie, that she too had to perish in order for there to be balance in the Force. That Force users with her kind of power, or the power of the Skywalker family, will always be dangerous or a threat to the balance of the Force and cause another to rise up and challenge them, and thus plunge the galaxy into chaos and war again. And this also ties back into what Maz Kanata told her in The Force Awakens about the never-ending fight between good and evil. Perhaps we will even learn in the movie, again most likely from Luke, that Anakin's purpose was indeed to balance the Force and end the constant war, but where things went wrong is with him falling in love and then having children, and Rey's real purpose is to somehow fix this and end the Skywalkers and the great imbalance their continued existence causes. This ending, of course, would then shut the door on there being an episode 10 someday, at least one that seems to carry on the Skywalker name in any way, shape, or form, which Kathleen Kennedy has said will always be the focus of the Saga movies. Then again, despite the money that could be made, maybe Lucasfilm and Disney will let go of any ideas to continue the Saga films because seemingly no matter what they do with them, it's going to be impossible to please all or even most of the fans. Some would no doubt utterly hate the new Saga trilogy, while some would love it, and some would fall somewhere in the middle and likely grow tired of the constant arguing between the two extremes, which sounds a lot like what's happening right now. And all of this kind of ties into why I think Kylo Ren will almost certainly perish in episode 9. In fact, I'd be shocked if he lives. And that's because if he does survive, the door is wide open for episode 10. People will probably even more or less demand to get an episode 10 someday because the story of the Skywalkers is clearly not done. However, if Kylo dies and Rey survives, and she takes on the Skywalker name, it both concludes the Skywalker Saga and still leaves room for it to continue should they choose to. From a business perspective, that sounds like about the best choice, and story-wise, it's about the best you can do considering it all comes down to just these two characters. And I'm not trying to take jabs at those characters by saying that, it's just that they have both had their issues endearing themselves to some fans, which is why the first half of episode 9 will almost certainly do all it can to fix that and make as many people as possible truly care about these characters and their final fate, which will hopefully set up an intense, nail-biting ending that is as emotional and gut-wrenching as possible. Because again, this final confrontation between Rey and Kylo Ren won't just be ending a movie or even a trilogy, it'll be ending the Star Wars Saga. And when you consider the near-perfect ending we once got with Return of the Jedi, it's not going to be easy to not only try and match that, but make it so the continuation of this story truly feels justified. That making another Star Wars trilogy after the first two wasn't just done to make a buck, but was done because there was an important part of the Skywalker story still to tell. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. How will episode 9 end? Am I on the right track here or way off? Either way, let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.